You don't live here anymore.
The rain hammered my garage roof like bullets on tin, while I lay under my rusted Ford, wrestling with a transmission that had seen better decades. October in Millfield was always miserable, but this year felt particularly vindictive. Water dripped through the corrugated metal onto my forehead as I cursed at a stubborn bolt that refused to budge. That's when I heard Vanessa's voice drifting through the thin wall separating our garage from the kitchen. She was on the phone, speaking in that breathy tone she used to reserve for me back when we still pretended our marriage wasn't circling the drain. "Mona, you have no idea how incredible he is," she whispered, thinking the rain would mask her words. "Greg has this massive presence. And last night, when I gave him everything, when I completely surrendered myself to him, he recorded it all, said it was just for us, something private and beautiful." My wrench slipped, skinning my knuckles against the transmission housing. Red mixed with motor oils, I held my breath, straining to hear more. "Aren't you worried Nick might find out?" Mona's nasal voice crackled through the phone speaker. My wife's sister had always been a gossip, but apparently now she was an accomplice too. Vanessa laughed, a sound that used to make my chest tight with affection. Now it made my stomach churn. "Nick, please. He's too busy playing with his punching bags and living in the past. Besides, the video's completely secure. Greg promised only we would ever see it." I slid out from under the Ford, my work clothes soaked with rain, oil, and now something much colder. 23 years of marriage. 23 years of working double shifts at the plant before I saved enough to open Sullivan's boxing gym. 23 years of believing Vanessa when she said her late nights at the law firm were about building her career, not building a relationship with some trust fund pretty boy named Greg. The kitchen went quiet. I heard her heels clicking across the linoleum, probably heading upstairs to our bedroom. Our bedroom, where apparently she'd been rehearsing performances for another man's camera. I wiped the red smear from my knuckles and pulled out my phone. If Greg thought their little home movie was secure, he'd clearly never met a blue-collar guy who'd spent years troubleshooting the gym's computer system. Vanessa always underestimated me, treated me like I was some knuckle-dragging throwback who couldn't navigate the digital world. Time to show her exactly how wrong she was. It took me 40 minutes to crack their shared cloud account. Vanessa had always been predictable with passwords, usually some combination of her birthday and our anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me that our wedding date was the key to unlocking her betrayal. The video was right there in a folder labeled Private Moments. I didn't watch it. Didn't need to see my wife's face contorted in passion for another man. Didn't need to hear her making sounds she hadn't made for me in years. The file size told me everything I needed to know about how thorough their documentation had been. But Greg had made a critical error. He'd uploaded it to a shared folder connected to Vanessa's work email. One click, and I had access to her entire contact list. Partners at Henderson, Klein & Associates, her college sorority group chat, her book club, her yoga instructor, even her mother's church committee. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the send button. This would destroy her, humiliate her beyond repair, end her career, torch her reputation, turn her into a laughingstock in our small city where everyone knew everyone else's business. She'd called me a pathetic loser just last week, said I was holding her back from the life she deserved. Said I was too small-minded to understand her ambitions. I hit send. The file began uploading to every contact in her phone, every email address in her professional network, every social media connection she'd cultivated over the years. I watched the progress bar creep toward completion, feeling something dark and satisfied unfurling in my chest. My phone buzzed. A text from Eddie, my best friend and the closest thing my gym had to a regular customer. "Dude, you need to get down here. Some crazy stuff is happening on Facebook." I looked at the clock. 3:17 in the morning. Eddie was a night owl, but even for him this was late to be scrolling social media. Another buzz. This time from Tommy Kowalski, who trained at my gym when he wasn't working construction. "Holy crap, Nick, is this real?" Then another and another. My phone started vibrating continuously as notifications flooded in. Apparently, Vanessa's contact list was more extensive than I'd realized, and social media moved faster than I'd anticipated. I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy, urgent. Vanessa was running. "Nick!" Her voice cracked like a whip across the garage. "Nick!" The kitchen door slammed open, and there she stood. My wife of 23 years, her blonde hair disheveled, her silk pajamas wrinkled, her phone clutched in her shaking hand like a tool. Her face was the color of old newspaper, and her eyes held a wildness I'd never seen before. Not even during our worst fights, not even when I'd lost the house payment in a poker game 15 years ago. "What did you do?" she whispered. I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "I shared something beautiful in private, sweetheart. Isn't that what you and Greg were going for?" She looked at her phone screen, and I watched her face crumble. "My boss, my colleagues, oh God, my mother's entire prayer group." Yeah, I was pretty thorough. Learned that from you, actually. You always said attention to detail was what separated the winners from the losers. Vanessa's phone kept buzzing. Each notification seemed to drain more color from her face, more strength from her legs. She sagged against the doorframe. "You're sick," she breathed. "You're actually sick." "Maybe, but I'm not a liar." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. The shock was giving way to rage, the kind of cold fury that had made her a feared prosecutor before she moved to civil law. "You have no idea what you've just done," she said, her voice steady now, dangerous. "No idea what this is going to cost you." I shrugged. Probably less than 23 years of marriage to a woman who thinks I'm too stupid to know when I'm being played. She turned and walked back into the house, her spine straight, her shoulders set. I heard her heels clicking up the stairs, heard the bedroom door slam, heard the muffled sound of phone calls being made. I looked at my phone, 87 new notifications and counting. Eddie's latest text made me smile. "Whatever you did, brother, you just became a legend." I grabbed my jacket and headed for the truck. If I was going to be a legend, I might as well go to the gym and start acting like one. The gym at 4 in the morning was my sanctuary. The heavy bags hung like sleeping giants in the dim light, and the smell of leather and sweat felt more like home than my actual house ever had. I'd built Sullivan's boxing gym from nothing, turning an abandoned auto parts store into something that mattered to guys like me who needed a place to hit things legally. Eddie was waiting for me, sitting on the edge of the ring with his laptop open and a crap-eating grin plastered across his weathered face. At 52, Eddie looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts of better men, but he had a heart bigger than Texas and loyalty that ran deeper than the Mariana Trench. "Nick, you magnificent bastard," he called out as I walked in. "You've gone viral. What are you talking about?" He spun the laptop around. Facebook was open to the Millfield community page, where someone had screenshot portions of the video and posted them with the caption, "Local lawyer Vanessa Sullivan shows her dedication to client services." The comments section was a dumpster fire of small-town gossip and crude jokes. I recognized names from high school, people I hadn't thought about in decades, all weighing in on my wife's extracurricular activities. "Jesus," I muttered. "It gets better," Eddie said, clicking to another tab. "Or worse, depending on your perspective." Someone posted it in the Henderson, Klein and Associates Google reviews. The firm's rating dropped from 4.8 stars to 2.1 in the last hour. My phone rang. Vanessa's name flashed on the screen. "You need to fix this," she said without preamble. Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying or screaming, maybe both. "Fix what? I didn't break anything that wasn't already broken." "My career's over, Nick. 20 years of building my reputation and you destroyed it in one night because your ego couldn't handle the truth." "What truth is that, sweetheart?" "That our marriage has been dead for years. That we both knew it. That I found someone who actually appreciates me." I walked over to the heavy bag and gave it a solid right hook. The chain rattled and the sound echoed through the empty gym. "You know what I appreciate, Vanessa? Honesty. You should have tried it sometime." "This isn't over," she said. "Greg's family has connections, real connections. You think you're some kind of working-class hero, but you're just a bitter old man who can't accept that his wife outgrew him." The line went dead. Eddie was watching me with the expression of a man who'd seen too many bar fights start exactly like this. "She's going to come at you hard, brother. Rich boy's family probably has lawyers on speed dial. Let them come. I didn't do anything illegal. Legal and smart ain't always the same thing." He was right, but I was past caring about smart. Smart would have been confronting Vanessa months ago when I first started suspecting. Smart would have been marriage counseling or a quiet divorce. Smart would have been a lot of things that didn't involve turning my wife into the most infamous woman in Millfield. The gym door chimed, and Tommy Kowalski walked in, followed by 3 other guys I recognized from the morning crowd. Word traveled fast in a town this size. "Nick," Tommy called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Dude, my wife showed me the Facebook thing. That's some cold-veined revenge right there." "It's not revenge," I said, wrapping my hands for a proper workout. "It's just truth with better distribution." The guys laughed, but I could see the discomfort in their eyes. They were here for the spectacle, to get close to the drama and have stories to tell their buddies at work. In a few days, when the novelty wore off, they'd start looking at me differently. The guy whose wife cheated on him. The cuck who had to resort to dirty tricks to get even. I spent the next 2 hours beating the heck out of everything in the gym that was designed to be hit. By the time I finished, my knuckles were raw, my shirt was soaked with sweat, and I felt marginally more human. My phone had been buzzing constantly. Texts, calls, Facebook notifications, email alerts. The modern equivalent of a public stoning, except everyone got to participate from the comfort of their own homes. One text stood out from the rest. It was from Sophie, my daughter, away at college 3 hours north in Madison. "Dad, what the heck is going on? My roommate showed me something on Instagram. Please tell me this is fake." I stared at the message for a long time. Sophie was the one good thing Vanessa and I had created together, the one part of our marriage that had never been tainted by resentment or disappointment. She was smart like her mother, but had inherited my sense of fairness, my belief that actions had consequences. I typed back, "It's complicated, sweetheart. Call me when you can." The response came immediately. "I'm driving home. We need to talk." That was exactly what I didn't need. Sophie getting dragged into this mess, having to choose sides between her parents like some kind of medieval custody battle. Eddie appeared at my shoulder. "You look like a man who needs a drink. It's 7 in the morning. Since when has that ever stopped us?" He had a point. We locked up the gym and walked 3 blocks to Murphy's Tavern, the kind of dive bar that opened early for shift workers and stayed open late for people who had nowhere else to go. The owner, Big Jim Murphy, had been serving breakfast beer to Millfield's working class for 30 years. "Well, well," Big Jim said as we walked in, "if it isn't the man of the hour." The bar was nearly empty except for 2 guys I didn't recognize, nursing coffee and what looked like the remnants of last night's drunk. But even they looked up when we entered, and I caught them whispering to each other. "Just coffee, Jim," I said. "Coffee, heck. First rounds on the house for local celebrities." He poured 2 shots of whiskey and slid them across the scarred wooden bar. "My wife saw that video. Says your missus has some serious flexibility for a woman her age." I threw back the shot without tasting it. The burn felt good, clean, like it was sterilizing something rotten inside me. "Jim, you ever been married? 32 years come December. You ever want to burn it all down? Just torch everything and walk away?" Big Jim refilled my glass. "Every Tuesday. But then Wednesday comes, and I remember why I fell in love with the crazy broad in the first place." "What if Wednesday never comes?" He shrugged. "Then I guess you find out what kind of man you really are." My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Janet Morrison from Channel 8 News. We'd like to get your side of the story regarding the video that's been circulating online. Would you be available for an interview this afternoon?" I hung up without answering. Eddie raised his glass. "To finding out what kind of man you really are." We drank, and I tried not to think about what that might mean. By noon, 3 more news outlets had called, and someone had set up a fake Twitter account called @LoserNick that was retweeting every mention of the video. The internet had a way of taking personal tragedy and turning it into entertainment, and I was learning that lesson in real time. Sophie arrived at the house around 1 o'clock, her Honda Civic pulling into our driveway with the urgency of an ambulance. She was 21, a junior studying communications at the University of Wisconsin, and she had her mother's sharp intelligence wrapped in my stubborn streak. It was not a combination that made for easy conversations. She walked into the kitchen where I was sitting with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and I could see Vanessa in the set of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders like she was preparing for battle. "Dad, what the heck were you thinking?" "Language, sweetheart. Don't you dare lecture me about language when half the internet has seen Mom having love with another man." She sat down across from me, and I noticed she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, and there were tissues crumpled in her fist. "Where's your mother?" "She's staying at Aunt Mona's. She can't come home because there are reporters camped outside her office, and people driving by the house taking pictures." I hadn't noticed the reporters. Then again, I'd been at the gym since 4 in the morning and hadn't paid attention to anything happening on our street. Sophie, I know this is hard to understand. No, Dad, it's not hard to understand. You found out Mom was cheating, and instead of handling it like an adult, you decided to humiliate her publicly. You turned our family into a joke. The words hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken in the ring. Sophie had always been proud of our family, had bragged to her friends about her parents who'd built successful careers from nothing. Now we were the kind of people who aired their dirty laundry on social media for entertainment. Your mother made choices, I said quietly. I just made sure those choices had consequences. By destroying her career? By making it impossible for her to show her face in this town? She destroyed her career the minute she decided to film herself with another man. I just made sure people knew about it. Sophie slammed her hand on the table, making the coffee mug jump. You're supposed to be the grown-up here. You're supposed to be better than this. Before I could respond, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Greg Hartwell, and I felt something dark and satisfied twist in my stomach. I need to take this, I told Sophie. Mr. Sullivan? The voice was smooth, educated, with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. This is Greg Hartwell. I think we need to talk. I think we needed to talk about 6 months ago, before you started screwing my wife, but better late than never. Sophie's eyes went wide. She'd probably never heard me talk to anyone with that level of barely controlled rage. Look, I understand you're upset, Greg continued, but what you did last night crossed a line. Vanessa is devastated. Her career is ruined. This has gone too far. Has it? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like we're just getting started. I'm trying to be reasonable here. Vanessa and I, what we have is real. We're in love. I know that's hard to hear, but you know what's hard to hear, Greg? My daughter crying because her family has become a punchline. You know what's hard to see? 23 years of marriage reduced to a viral video, so forgive me if I'm not in the mood to hear about your great love story. We can fix this. Take down the video, issue an apology, and we can all move forward. I'm prepared to make it worth your while. Are you trying to buy me off? I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. I looked at Sophie, who was listening to every word with the intensity of someone watching a car accident happen in slow motion. Here's my solution, Greg. Stay away from my family. Stay away from my wife, and maybe, if you're very lucky, I won't decide to share any of the other interesting things I found on that cloud account. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then, what other things? Oh, did I forget to mention? Your little love nest wasn't the only thing Vanessa documented. Apparently, she's been keeping quite the digital diary. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even some very detailed text messages about your performance reviews. More silence. You're bluffing. Am I? Tell you what, Greg, why don't you test that theory? Keep pushing me. Keep trying to play the reasonable guy. And we'll see what else the good people of Millfield might find interesting about your relationship with my wife. He hung up. Sophie was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Dad, you're scaring me. Good. Maybe that means you're finally understanding how serious this is. This isn't you. The man who raised me wouldn't do something like this. The man who raised you believed in playing fair, following rules, treating people with respect. That man got played for a fool by his wife and her boyfriend, so maybe it's time for a different kind of man. She stood up, tears streaming down her face. I can't be here right now. I can't watch you turn into someone I don't recognize. Sophie, wait. But she was already walking out, and a few seconds later I heard her car start up and pull out of the driveway. I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the house settle around me. This was what victory felt like, apparently. Empty rooms and the sound of your own breathing. My phone buzzed with a text from Eddie. Turn on channel 8. You're famous. I found the remote and clicked to the local news. There was Janet Morrison, the reporter who'd called earlier, standing outside Henderson, Klein & Associates with a microphone in her hand. The video, which appears to show prominent local attorney Vanessa Sullivan engaged in intimate acts with an unidentified man, has gone viral on social media platforms, she was saying. The law firm has issued a statement saying they are investigating the matter and will take appropriate action based on their findings. The camera cut to a statement being read by someone I didn't recognize. Henderson, Klein & Associates maintains the highest standards of professional conduct. We are reviewing the situation and will respond appropriately once we have all the facts. Then they showed a picture of Vanessa from the firm's website, one of those professional headshots where she looked confident and successful. The kind of woman who had her life together, who made smart choices and reaped the rewards. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone rang again. This time it was Vanessa. "Are you watching this?" she asked without preamble. "Yeah." "They're going to fire me, Nick. 20 years with this firm, and they're going to throw me away like garbage because of what you did." "What I did?" "Vanessa, I didn't make that video. I didn't choose to cheat on my husband. I didn't decide to document my affair for posterity. I just made sure the truth came out." "The truth?" "The truth is that our marriage has been over for years. The truth is that we've been going through the motions, pretending to be happy when we both knew it was finished. The truth is that I found someone who makes me feel alive again. And the truth is that you're a liar and a cheat who got caught." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, colder. "Greg's father owns 3 businesses in this town, Nick. He sits on the city council. He has friends in the police department, the mayor's office, the chamber of commerce. You think you're some kind of working-class hero, but you just declared war on people who have more power than you can imagine. Let them come. Oh, and they will. And when they do, you're going to wish you'd taken Greg's offer to handle this quietly." The line went dead, and I realized I was shaking. Not from fear, but from something else, something that felt like anticipation. I'd spent 23 years being the reasonable one, the responsible one, the one who played by the rules and tried to do the right thing. It had gotten me a cheating wife, a daughter who was ashamed of me, and a reputation as the guy who couldn't keep his woman satisfied. Maybe it was time to see what being unreasonable could accomplish. The next morning brought a new development that I should have seen coming but somehow didn't. I arrived at the gym to find a notice taped to the front door. Notice of lease violation. Conduct detrimental to property values. Eddie was standing next to his pickup truck in the parking lot, holding a cup of coffee and wearing the expression of a man delivering bad news. "When did this show up?" I asked, ripping the notice off the door. "About an hour ago. Mrs. Chen from the property management company was here with some guy in a suit. They took pictures of everything." I read through the legal jargon, but the message was clear. My landlord was claiming that the recent notoriety associated with my business was affecting the value of the strip mall where Sullivan's boxing gym was located. I had 30 days to remedy the situation or face eviction. "Hartwell," I muttered. "What?" "Greg's father. Vanessa said he had connections. Apparently, one of those connections is my landlord." Eddie spat into the gravel. "Rich folks got their own way of fighting, don't they?" We went inside, and I tried to pretend it was just another day. But the phone kept ringing with reporters, curiosity seekers, and people wanting to know if the stories they'd heard were true. By 10 o'clock, I'd stopped answering altogether. That's when Tommy Kowalski showed up with news that made everything worse. "Nick, we got a problem," he said, still wearing his construction clothes and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Should join the club." "No, man, this is serious. My wife works at the bank, right? She heard from her supervisor that someone's been asking questions about your business loan, like detailed questions about your payment history, your credit rating, whether you've been using the gym for any illegal activities." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What kind of illegal activities?" "I don't know, but they mentioned gambling, money laundering, tax evasion. The kind of stuff that gets the IRS interested in your books." Eddie looked up from where he was organizing equipment. "They're trying to destroy you, brother. Not just embarrass you or run you out of town. They want to eliminate you completely." I sat down on the edge of the boxing ring and tried to think. This was escalating beyond anything I'd anticipated. I'd thought I was playing in a small-town drama, but apparently I'd walked into a war with people who had resources I couldn't match. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Dad, I heard about the gym. Please call me." I was about to respond when the front door opened and 3 men walked in. I recognized one of them immediately. Detective Ray Miller, a guy I'd gone to high school with who'd always resented anyone who didn't treat him with the deference he thought his badge deserved. Nick Sullivan? The man in the center was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm District Attorney William Hartwell. I believe you know my son, Greg's father." Up close, I could see the family resemblance, but where Greg had soft edges and an entitled smirk, his father was all sharp angles and controlled intensity. "Mr. Hartwell, what can I do for you?" "You can start by explaining why you thought it was appropriate to distribute pornographic material without consent. In this state, that's a felony." Detective Miller stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his handcuffs. We've had several complaints about harassment, cyberbullying, and invasion of privacy. Thought we should have a conversation before this gets any more out of hand. I looked at the three men standing in my gym, using their authority to intimidate me, and felt something snap inside my chest. Gentlemen, I appreciate you stopping by, but unless you have a warrant, I think this conversation is over. We don't need a warrant to ask questions, Miller said. No, but you need probable cause to arrest me, and you need evidence to charge me. Since I didn't break any laws, I'm guessing you're short on both. District Attorney Hartwell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mr. Sullivan, my son made a mistake getting involved with a married woman, but your response has been disproportionate and frankly criminal. The video you distributed was created without your knowledge or consent, which makes your actions theft and distribution of stolen property. Actually, Ishali, I said, standing up and walking closer to the three men. The video was stored on a cloud account that my wife and I share, in joint account, joint access, joint ownership of all files. I didn't steal anything, I just shared something that belonged to me as much as it belonged to her. The DA's smile faltered slightly. Furthermore, I continued, your son recorded intimate acts with a married woman and stored them on a shared digital platform. In this state, that could be considered adultery, which, while not criminal, certainly opens him up to civil liability, especially if that married woman's husband decided to sue for alienation of affection. Are you threatening my son? I'm explaining the law, which I assume you're familiar with, being a district attorney and all. Detective Miller took another step forward. You're walking a thin line, Sullivan. No, Detective Miller. I'm walking exactly where the law allows me to walk. But I appreciate you stopping by to clarify that for me. The three men exchanged glances, and I could see them recalculating their approach. They'd come here expecting to intimidate a working-class guy who wouldn't know his rights. But I'd spent enough time around lawyers to understand the basics of what I could and couldn't do. This isn't over, D.A. Hartwell said as they turned to leave. I certainly hope not, I replied. It's just getting interesting. After they left, Eddie let out a long whistle. Brother, you just poked a bear with a very sharp stick. Yeah, but I also learned something important. What's that? They're scared. If they had a real case, they wouldn't have come here to threaten me. They'd have just arrested me. Tommy, who'd been silent during the entire encounter, finally spoke up. Nick, these people can make your life heck, even if they can't put you in jail. Maybe it's time to think about backing down. I looked around the gym, at the heavy bags and speed bags, at the ring where I'd taught dozens of kids how to defend themselves, at the walls covered with pictures of local fighters who'd trained here before moving on to bigger things. Tommy, you know what I learned in 25 years of boxing? What? The guy who backs down first usually stays down, and I'm not ready to stay down yet. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer it. Mr. Sullivan, this is Marcus Webb from Webb Investigations. I specialize in domestic cases, and I think we should talk. About what? About the very interesting financial records I've uncovered regarding Greg Hartwell and his business dealings. Records that I think you'd find quite illuminating. I looked at Eddie and Tommy, both of whom were listening to every word. Where do you want to meet? Murphy's Tavern, 1 hour, and Mr. Sullivan, bring your checkbook. What I have to show you is going to cost Greg Hartwell a lot more than it's going to cost you. After I hung up, Eddie grinned. Now we're playing chess instead of checkers. Yeah, but the question is whether I'm smart enough to win at chess. Brother, you just backed down a district attorney and a detective without breaking a sweat. I think you're smarter than anyone gives you credit for. I hoped he was right because I had the feeling the real game was just getting started. Marcus Webb looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a private investigator. Rumpled suit, 3-day stubble, and eyes that had seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. He was sitting in the back booth at Murphy's Tavern with a manila folder and a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago. Mr. Sullivan, he said as I approached, thank you for coming. I slid into the booth across from him. How did you know to call me? In my line of work, you learn to follow the money. And when a small-town scandal suddenly escalates to involve the district attorney and property management companies, that usually means someone with deep pockets is pulling strings. He opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. Bank statements, business licenses, incorporation papers, and what looked like email printouts. Greg Hartwell Jr. owns a tech consulting company called Digital Solutions LLC. On paper, it's a legitimate business that helps local companies upgrade their computer systems. In reality, it's a money laundering operation for his father's political campaigns. I studied the documents. Even with my limited understanding of business finance, I could see irregularities, payments from companies that didn't exist, consulting contracts for services that were never performed, invoices that didn't match any actual work. How did you get all this? Webb smiled. Let's just say that Greg Jr. is not as careful with his digital security as he thinks he is. Amazing what people will store on cloud servers without proper encryption. The irony was perfect. Greg had been undone by the same kind of digital carelessness that had exposed his affair with my wife. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing. This information is yours, free of charge. Consider it a professional courtesy from one man who's been screwed over by rich people to another. Why would you do that? Webb's expression darkened. Because 6 months ago, D.A. Hartwell had my private investigator's license suspended on trumped-up charges. Seems I was getting too close to some uncomfortable truths about his campaign financing. I've been waiting for an opportunity to return the favor. I looked at the documents again. What exactly am I supposed to do with this? That's up to you. But if I were in your position, I might consider sharing this information with the State Ethics Commission, the IRS, and maybe a few local reporters who specialize in political corruption. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. We need to talk. Meet me at the house at 6 p.m. Come alone. I showed the message to Webb. What do you think? I think your wife is about to make you an offer. The question is whether you're ready to accept it or whether you want to keep playing this game to the end. What would you do? Webb gathered up the documents and slid them back into the folder. Mr. Sullivan, I've been in this business for 20 years. I've seen marriages destroyed, careers ruined, families torn apart by secrets and lies. And I've learned one thing. Revenge is like a fire. It can warm you up or burn your house down, but it never stops being dangerous. He stood up and handed me the folder. But sometimes a man's house needs to burn down before he can build something better. After Webb left, I sat in the tavern for another hour, nursing a beer and thinking about what came next. The documents in the folder represented nuclear tools in my war with the Hartwells. But using them would escalate things beyond anything I'd imagined when I sent that video to Vanessa's contact list. At 5:30, I drove home to face whatever my wife had to say. Vanessa was waiting in the living room, sitting on the couch we'd bought together 15 years ago when we still believed our marriage would last forever. She looked exhausted, older than her 44 years, and I felt a momentary pang of guilt for what I'd put her through. Thank you for coming, she said. This is still my house, Vanessa. For now. I sat in the chair across from her, the same chair where I'd watched countless football games and helped Sophie with homework and pretended everything was normal, even when it clearly wasn't. Greg's father came to see you today, she said, along with Detective Miller and some very creative interpretations of the law. They're trying to protect their family, Nick, just like you're trying to protect yours. I'm not protecting anything. I'm just making sure actions have consequences. Vanessa leaned forward and I could see tears forming in her eyes. What do you want from me? What will it take to end this? I want you to admit what you did. I want you to acknowledge that you destroyed our marriage, not me. I want you to stop playing the victim. Fine. I had an affair. I fell in love with another man. I documented our relationship in ways that were private and personal. I'm sorry that hurt you, but I'm not sorry for finding happiness. And I'm not sorry for sharing that happiness with the world. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. This has to stop, Nick. Sophie is falling apart. My career is over. Greg is talking about leaving town permanently. How much destruction is enough? I thought about the folder sitting in my truck, about the nuclear option that Webb had handed me, about the choice between ending this war and escalating it beyond anyone's ability to control. I don't know, I said honestly. I'll give you the divorce. I'll give you the house. I'll give you whatever you want if you just stop this campaign of humiliation. What I wanted was a wife who wouldn't cheat on me. But that ship sailed about 6 months ago. Vanessa stood up and for a moment she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with 24 years ago. Young, determined, full of fire and ambition. You know what your problem is, Nick? You think this is about right and wrong, about justice and consequences. But it's not. It's about a man who couldn't keep his wife happy, who couldn't accept that people change and relationships end. It's about your ego. Maybe, but it's also about a woman who thought she was smarter than everyone else, who thought she could have her cake and eat it too, who thought her husband was too stupid to figure out what was really going on. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Greg's father has resources you can't imagine, Nick. He can destroy your business, your reputation, your future. He can make it impossible for you to work anywhere in this state. Is your pride really worth that? After she left, I sat alone in the living room for a long time, thinking about pride and consequences and the point of no return. Then I went out to my truck and got the folder Webb had given me. Some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt, but sometimes you had to burn them anyway to stop the enemy from crossing. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to the State Ethics Commission. The story broke on a Thursday morning 3 weeks later. The headline in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel read, "Local DA's son linked to campaign finance violations." By noon, it had been picked up by the Associated Press, and by evening, Greg Hartwell Jr. was the lead story on every news station in Wisconsin. I was at the gym when Eddie burst through the door with a newspaper in one hand and his phone in the other, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Brother, you need to see this," he said, spreading the paper across the front counter. The article was thorough and devastating. It detailed the money laundering scheme, the fake consulting contracts, the illegal campaign contributions, and the web of corruption that connected Greg's business to his father's political career. There were quotes from the State Ethics Commission, the IRS, and 3 different federal agencies that were now investigating the Hartwell family's financial dealings. "How did they get all this information so fast?" Eddie asked. Turns out Webb wasn't the only person who'd been investigating the Hartwells. The feds had been building a case for months, but they needed someone to provide the final pieces of evidence. My phone rang. It was Sophie. "Dad, I just saw the news. Did you do this?" "I provided some information to the appropriate authorities. They did the rest." "Jesus, Dad, Greg's been arrested. His father resigned from the DA's office this morning. There are FBI agents searching their house right now." I felt a moment of something that might have been satisfaction, but it was mixed with exhaustion and a strange sense of emptiness. "How's your mother?" "She's not good. She's been crying for 2 days. Her law firm fired her yesterday, and now with Greg in jail, she's completely alone." "Sophie, No, Dad, let me finish. What Mom did was wrong. I understand that now. But what you've done? This is bigger than just getting back at her for cheating. You've destroyed people's lives. They destroyed their own lives. I just made sure everyone knew about it. Maybe, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Are you happy? Now that you've won, now that you've gotten your revenge, are you actually happy?" I looked around the empty gym at the equipment that might be repossessed if I couldn't make the lease payments, at the walls that suddenly felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. "I don't know," I said. "That's what I thought." After Sophie hung up, I sat in the silence of the gym and tried to figure out what came next. The war was over, and I'd won more decisively than I'd ever imagined possible. Greg was facing federal charges that could put him in prison for years. His father's political career was finished, and the family's business empire was under investigation by multiple agencies. Vanessa's career was destroyed, her reputation was in ruins, and her lover was in jail. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to accomplish and more. So why did I feel like I'd lost something important? The front door chimed, and Detective Miller walked in. He looked different than he had during his intimidation visit weeks earlier. Smaller, somehow, and much less confident. "Nick, he said, nodding in my direction. "Detective, come to arrest me for something else I didn't do." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Actually, I came to apologize. I was out of line that day, and I let personal relationships cloud my professional judgment." "Personal relationships?" D.A. Hartwell and I go way back. He helped me get promoted to detective, and I felt like I owed him. But that's no excuse for what I did. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but he seemed genuinely contrite. "What's going to happen to him?" "Hartwell. He's finished. The federal investigation is just getting started, but from what I've heard, they have enough evidence to put him away for a long time. His son, too." "And my wife?" Miller shrugged. "She wasn't involved in the financial stuff, as far as anyone can tell. But her career's over, and she's probably going to be called as a witness in the federal trial. Not exactly the life she was planning." After Miller left, I locked up the gym and drove home, through streets that suddenly felt foreign to me. I'd lived in Millfield my entire life, but now I felt like a stranger in my own town. People knew who I was, knew what I'd done, and I could see them watching me with a mixture of admiration and fear. At home, I found Vanessa sitting in her car in the driveway. She looked up as I approached, and I could see that she'd been crying. "Can we talk?" she asked. "I thought we'd said everything we needed to say. Please, Nick, just 5 minutes." I got in the passenger seat of her car, and we sat in silence for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. "I'm leaving town," she said finally. "Where will you go?" "My sister in Denver said I can stay with her until I figure things out. Start over somewhere. Nobody knows what happened here." "What about Sophie?" "She's an adult. She can make her own choices about who she wants to have a relationship with." I looked at the house we'd shared for 15 years, at the windows where we'd hung Christmas lights, and the porch where we'd sat on summer evenings planning a future that would never come. "Do you hate me?" she asked. "No," I said, and realized it was true. "I hate what you did, and I hate what it turned me into, but I don't hate you." "What did it turn you into?" I thought about the question. "Someone I don't recognize. Someone who's capable of destroying people's lives and calling it justice." Vanessa reached over and touched my hand. "We both became people we don't recognize, Nick. Maybe that's what happens when a marriage dies slowly instead of all at once." "Maybe." She started the car. "I'm sorry, Nick, for all of it. For the affair, for the lies, for what it cost both of us." "I'm sorry, too." After she drove away, I stood in the driveway for a long time, looking at the house that was now entirely mine, and wondering if that was what victory was supposed to feel like. My phone buzzed with a text from Eddie. "Drinks at Murphy's. You look like you need them." He was right. I looked like I needed a lot of things, but drinks were a good place to start. At Murphy's, the usual crowd was buzzing with excitement about the day's news. Big Jim poured me a whiskey without being asked, and Eddie raised his glass in a toast. "To Nick Sullivan," he announced to the bar. "The man who took on the most powerful family in town and won." Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and I felt like a fraud accepting their congratulations. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival, like crawling out of a wreckage that I'd helped create. "Speech!" someone called out from the back of the bar. I stood up, holding my whiskey, looking at the faces of people I'd known my entire life. Working people, honest people, people who believed that justice meant something. 25 years ago, I said, I learned that the key to winning a fight isn't hitting harder than the other guy. It's being willing to take more punishment than he is. Being willing to get back up one more time than he knocks you down. The bar was quiet, everyone listening. But I also learned that sometimes, when you're focused on winning the fight, you forget why you started fighting in the first place. And sometimes, by the time you win, there's nothing left worth winning. I finished my drink and set the glass on the bar. "Thank you for your support, but I think I'm done fighting for a while." I walked out of Murphy's Tavern and into the cold October night, leaving behind the cheers and congratulations and the sound of people who thought they understood what had happened here. At home, I sat in my living room and looked at the framed pictures on the mantel. Wedding photos, family vacations, Sophie's graduation from high school. Evidence of a life that had been real once before it became a casualty of war. My phone rang one more time. It was Sophie. "Dad, I just wanted to say that I'm proud of you." "For what?" "For winning. For not letting them destroy you. For being stronger than everyone thought you were." "Sophie, I'm not sure I won anything. You stood up for yourself. You fought back when powerful people tried to intimidate you. You proved that actions have consequences, even for rich people who think they're above the law." I thought about that. Maybe she was right. Maybe sometimes winning wasn't about getting what you wanted. Maybe it was about proving that you couldn't be broken, couldn't be silenced, couldn't be made to disappear just because someone with more money and power wanted you to. "I love you, sweetheart," I said. "I love you too, Dad, and I'm coming home this weekend. We have a lot to talk about." After we hung up, I walked through the empty house, turning off lights and checking locks, preparing for sleep in a home that was finally completely mine. Outside, Millfield settled into another quiet night, but I knew that by morning, the story would have spread further. The man who'd taken down the Hartwells, the blue-collar guy who'd outsmarted the lawyers and politicians, the husband who'd turned his wife's betrayal into their complete destruction. I'd become a legend, but legends were just stories people told themselves about things they didn't fully understand. In the darkness of my bedroom, I lay awake thinking about consequences and justice and the price of revenge. I'd set out to make sure my wife's affair had consequences, and I'd succeeded beyond my wildest imagination. But every action had consequences, including mine, and I was just beginning to understand what I'd really won and what it had cost me to win it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new consequences. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was exactly where I belonged. In my own home, in my own bed, accountable to no one but myself. The war was over. I'd won. And now I had to figure out how to live with victory,